So even when internal Microsoft leaders have expressed frustration and the integration is breaking core functionality.
How do I get rid of Copilot everywhere?
-31. That is Microsoft's Employee Net Promoter Score, the metric that measures how strongly employees recommend their employer to others.
Microsoft Copilot AI was a huge failure across its cloud and non-cloud platforms. What the hell happened, Microsoft?
The industry average for technology companies is +28. Apple sits at +52. Google at +44. Microsoft is at -31. More employees actively discouraging people from joining than recommending it. In 4 years, a company that engineers competed to join, that ranked consistently among the most desirable employers in the technology industry, that Satya Nadella transformed from the aggression of the Ballmer era into something genuinely celebrated, that company has become a place where less than half of its own workforce intends to stay for 2 more years, where only 38% of employees believe the products they work on genuinely help users, where voluntary turnover hit 19.3% in 2025 against a historical average of 8 to 9%. Nearly 1 in 5 Microsoft employees leaving annually. And the exits are not distributed evenly across the organization. They are concentrated in exactly the worst possible places: senior engineers with 14 years of Windows kernel knowledge, principal architects who understand why design decisions were made and where fragility lives in legacy code, UX designers who spent years writing the user protection standards that were then overridden by AI engagement metrics, AI researchers who found that ethical concerns about user privacy were understood but overridden by business requirements. The people who built the empire are leaving, and they are explaining exactly why in LinkedIn posts that are going viral with hundreds of thousands of engagements. This is not a human resources story. This is a collapse happening in real time, from the inside, driven by the same product decisions that are simultaneously driving users toward Linux. And the engineers who are leaving are not going to competitors building another version of Windows. They are going to Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu. They are going to Valve. They are going to System 76. They are building the alternatives that Microsoft's own decisions created the demand for. Start with the LinkedIn posts, because they are the visible surface of something much deeper. February 2026. Software engineers, program managers, and product designers who spent 10, 15, even 20 years at Microsoft are updating their profiles to open to work. Their departure posts are not quiet exits with diplomatic language about new opportunities and gratitude for the journey. They are public declarations, detailed accounts of why they are leaving, descriptions of what Microsoft has become that contrast painfully with what it was when they joined. One senior Windows engineer with 17 years at Microsoft wrote that he joined because he believed they were building software that empowered people, and that he was leaving because they had spent 4 years building software that monitors, interrupts, and extracts from people. That he could not ship products he was ashamed of anymore. The post received 340,000 likes, 12,000 comments, and was shared 47,000 times. It is one of dozens going viral every week from former Microsoft employees who spent their careers building the platform that is now driving the exodus they are describing from the inside. When engineers with 17 years of institutional knowledge use the language of shame to describe the products they worked on, that is not dissatisfied employee venting. That is the moral reasoning of people who spent careers building something that mattered, watched it transform into something they could not defend, and made the professional decision to stop participating. The specificity of what they describe matters. Not vague complaints about management culture or work-life balance. Precise accounts of products designed to surveil users, features built to be difficult to disable even after users explicitly turn them off, design standards written to protect users from manipulative interfaces that were overridden when they conflicted with AI engagement metrics, ethical concerns raised formally through internal channels and dismissed with messaging that aligned with company direction or find other positions. These are not grievances. They are documented accounts of an institutional culture that selected against integrity and for compliance. And the engineers who recognized what was being selected for made their choice accordingly. The recall rebellion is where most engineers inside Microsoft date the real collapse. The moment the direction of the company became impossible to rationalize as temporary misalignment that would eventually correct. When recall was announced in May 2024, a group of 340 Microsoft employees signed an internal letter addressed directly to Satya Nadella. The letter argued that recall represented a fundamental violation of user trust. That shipping continuous screenshot surveillance infrastructure as a productivity feature was ethically wrong. That it contradicted Microsoft's publicly stated privacy commitments in ways that would be immediately apparent to any user who understood what the feature actually did. That the decision to make it opt out rather than opt in, defaulting to surveillance unless users specifically discovered and disabled it, was a deliberate choice to maximize data collection by exploiting the majority of users who would never notice the setting. 340 employees. Not junior engineers complaining about a feature they personally disliked. Senior personnel raising formal ethical objections through the internal process that Microsoft's own cultural framework claimed to value. Management's response to the signatories was dismissive. Employees who signed were told they could either align with company direction or find positions elsewhere. That response is the single most important data point in this entire story because of what it reveals about institutional priorities. Microsoft did not engage with the ethical arguments. It did not convene a review of whether the concerns had merit. It did not acknowledge that 340 employees signing a letter to the CEO represented a signal worth taking seriously. It issued an ultimatum that reframed formal ethical objection as a failure of alignment requiring correction or departure. 15 engineers who signed the letter quit within 3 months, citing management's response as confirmation that ethical concerns from engineers were structurally unwelcome regardless of their merit. One principal engineer with 14 years at Microsoft wrote publicly that when you tell employees raising ethical concerns to find another job, you are selecting for compliance over integrity. The post was shared 89,000 times. The message it carried spread through every engineering community that matters. The message was not that Microsoft had made a bad product decision. It was that Microsoft had made a bad organizational decision. One that told everyone watching exactly what kind of concerns were welcome and what kind were not. The Copilot forced integration strategy generated its own parallel revolt with its own documentation. Microsoft's directive was that Copilot must be present everywhere, must activate automatically, must be difficult to fully disable, and that updates must re-enable it after users turned it off. The business logic driving this directive was AI engagement metrics. More Copilot usage justifies the billions Microsoft invested in OpenAI and provides the investor narrative that Microsoft's AI strategy is delivering returns. Engineers documented internally that forced re-enabling of disabled features violated user consent principles. That designing interfaces to be difficult to disable was a dark pattern. The specific category of manipulative design that exists to override user preference in favor of developer interest. That Microsoft's own published design standards explicitly prohibited exactly this behavior. They were not raising objections based on personal preference or general ethics. They were pointing out that Microsoft was violating rules Microsoft had written for itself. The response from leadership was that the design principles needed updating. That Copilot targets took priority. That engineers who could not align should explore other teams. Several explored other companies instead. A UX designer published her resignation letter publicly. She had spent 6 years at Microsoft helping write the design standards that protected users from manipulative interfaces. She described spending her last year watching leadership override those standards whenever they conflicted with AI engagement metrics. That she could not help build the thing she had spent years protecting users from. That post represents something important beyond the individual departure it documents. It describes an organization that wrote rules for itself about how to treat users, enforced those rules until they became inconvenient, and then overrode them with the authority of business requirements. The rules existed not as genuine constraints on product behavior, but as marketing assets, demonstrable commitments that could be cited publicly while being subordinated privately to commercial objectives whenever the two came into conflict. Engineers who spent careers believing the rules were real understood from that override what they were actually working within. The employee survey data leaked in January 2026 provides the quantitative backbone for what the viral LinkedIn posts describe qualitatively. The numbers are worth sitting with precisely because they represent the aggregated internal assessment of the people who build what Microsoft ships. In 2022, 71% of Microsoft employees agreed with the statement that they believed the products they worked on genuinely helped users. By 2025, that number had fallen to 38%. In 3 years, the proportion of Microsoft's own engineering workforce that believes their work is genuinely helping people has nearly halved. The statement that employees were proud to tell people where they worked went from 79% positive in 2022 to 41% in 2025. The intention to remain at Microsoft in 2 years went from 68% to 44%. 4 years. Every metric measuring how Microsoft's own workforce assesses the company's direction, products, and integrity moved in the same direction simultaneously, not gradually. The curve steepened each year as the gap between what Microsoft said about its values and what Microsoft shipped became impossible for an increasing proportion of the workforce to paper over. Glassdoor ratings dropped from 4.3 in 2022 to 3.6 in 2025. The reviews consistently cite the same themes: loss of mission focus, ethical concerns with products, and management that dismisses engineer input. These are not reviews from disgruntled outliers. They are from a cross-section of current and recent employees whose independent accounts converge on the same institutional diagnosis. Top engineering programs noticed: MIT, Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, Berkeley, all reporting reduced Microsoft recruiting success. Students who competed for Microsoft offers 2 years ago are choosing Apple, Google, Anthropic, and startups. A Stanford computer science professor stated plainly that Microsoft used to be in the top 5 employers students pursued. In the year of that statement, it was not in the top 10. The reputation change over 3 years in communities that move slowly on reputational assessments because they have long institutional memories is striking. The knowledge drain that accompanies the talent exodus creates a compounding problem that does not appear on any balance sheet but manifests in exactly the kinds of product failures that users experience as bugs, degraded performance, and features that break things they were not supposed to touch. When a principal engineer who has worked on the Windows audio stack for 14 years leaves, they take with them an understanding that is not documented anywhere. Why specific design decisions were made. Why certain approaches were tried and abandoned decades ago. Where the fragility lives in the legacy code that cannot be refactored without breaking things in ways that take months to diagnose. A former engineering manager at Microsoft described the consequence directly. After engineers who understood the Windows audio stack at a level nobody else did departed, they started seeing bugs that had never appeared before. Not because the code changed. Because the people who understood why the code worked that way were gone. 8 months to debug problems that would have taken those engineers 3 hours. This pattern is not limited to audio. Networking stack, security architecture, update infrastructure, file system dependencies. Every complex system whose senior engineers have exited becomes a black box inherited by engineers who do not fully understand what they have received. Junior engineers build new features on top of systems they do not comprehend at the depth required. Dependencies that senior engineers held in their heads do not appear in any documentation, because documentation is written for the things that are hard to do, not for the things that are obvious to the people who built them. New features break old functionality in ways that take debugging cycles measured in months, because the understanding of why the old functionality worked the way it did departed with the people who built it. The degraded product quality that Windows users experience, the broken audio drivers after updates, the gaming performance regressions, the boot loops, the features that reset after users configured them, traces directly to this compounding knowledge loss. The product is getting worse not because Microsoft hired worse engineers, but because the engineers who understood why the product worked the way it did are no longer there. The destination of departing Microsoft engineers is the detail that should make Microsoft's leadership most uncomfortable. Not where they are going in terms of companies, though that is significant, but what they are building when they get there. Canonical, the company behind Ubuntu, hired 23 former Microsoft engineers in 2025. Valve hired 17. System76 hired 8. Engineers who built Windows are now building Ubuntu. Engineers who built Windows Update infrastructure are now building Steam OS. Engineers who built Windows security are now building the distributions that users are fleeing to. The talent exodus from Microsoft is not distributing randomly across the technology industry. It is concentrating in precisely the organizations building the Linux ecosystem that is absorbing the users Microsoft is losing. The competitive dynamic this creates is structurally different from normal technology market competition. Microsoft is not losing engineers to companies building a better version of Windows. It is losing engineers to companies building the platform that benefits directly from every user Windows loses. The institutional knowledge flowing out of Microsoft is flowing into the organization's best position to use it. Former Microsoft AI researchers joined Anthropic and Google DeepMind, citing environments where ethical concerns actually stop deployments rather than being acknowledged and overridden. One described the defining difference as this: at Microsoft, concerns about user privacy were understood, but business requirements took precedence. At the new employer, the concerns stopped the deployment. That is not a description of a better salary or a more interesting technical problem. It is a description of an organization where the ethical reasoning of engineers is treated as a genuine input into product decisions rather than as an obstacle to be managed around. The engineers who care most about building things responsibly, who are most likely to raise concerns, most likely to document problems, most likely to push back on directions they find ethically indefensible, are selecting into environments where their concerns matter. They are selecting out of Microsoft. The organization this selection pressure produces over time is one where the institutional capacity for ethical self-correction diminishes as the people most likely to trigger it depart. Satya Nadella's position in this situation carries a specific irony that the leaked Q3 2025 all-hands meeting transcript illuminates. Nadella built his reputation on a genuine transformation. The transition from Steve Ballmer's aggressive competitive posture to something warmer and more collaborative. The embrace of open source that produced the GitHub acquisition and a genuine shift in Microsoft's relationship with the developer community. The cultural change that made Microsoft a place engineers wanted to work again after years of the stack ranking dysfunction that had driven away talent and produced products that reflected the organization's internal conflicts rather than user needs. Engineers joined Microsoft because of that transformation, because it felt like evidence that a large corporation could change direction and recover its integrity. The Windows 11 strategy, aggressive AI integration, surveillance features, forced updates, subscription monetization, dark patterns overriding user consent, contradicts every element of what made the Nadella era celebrated. Engineers who joined because of the cultural transformation are leaving because that transformation has reversed. The person they believed in built something, the strategy he approved is dismantling it. The all-hands transcript makes this visible in a single exchange. An engineer asked directly how to reconcile Microsoft's stated values around privacy and user empowerment with features like recall and forced Copilot re-enabling. Nadella's response mentioned AI's transformative potential, Microsoft's responsibility to lead innovation, and the importance of customer feedback. It did not answer the question. Engineers who attended described it as confirmation that leadership had no answer, not that Nadella was unwilling to give one, but that there was no answer that could reconcile what he was describing and what Microsoft was shipping within a consistent framework. Several engineers quit within weeks of that meeting. Not in anger. In the specific kind of clarity that comes from understanding that a question you care about will never receive a real answer from the organization asking you to keep building things in its service. The broader picture this creates for Microsoft's engineering future compounds in ways that are difficult to reverse once the selection dynamic is established. Companies that retain only compliant employees, those who either cannot leave easily or have accepted the direction regardless of its implications, build worse products than companies where engineers can and do push back on directions they find ethically or technically problematic. Worse products drive more users away. Engineers who care about quality do not want to work at organizations building products they consider inferior or harmful. The cycle accelerates and feeds itself. Microsoft's engineering organization in March 2026 is hollowed from the inside. Senior talent has departed. The institutional knowledge they carried is gone with them. Recruiting pipelines are degraded as top engineering programs report reduced placement success, and students who competed for Microsoft offers 2 years ago are choosing other destinations. The engineers who remain are increasingly those who either lack the mobility to leave or have made peace with the direction. The engineers who pushed back are gone. That selection pressure is exactly backward from what an organization needs to maintain and improve complex systems that require deep institutional knowledge and ethical self-correction to build responsibly. Bill Gates built Microsoft on a straightforward chain of logic that defined the company's first 3 decades. Talented engineers empowered to do good work build great products. Great products earn genuine user loyalty. User loyalty builds sustainable business that can fund the next generation of great products. Windows 11 inverted every step of that chain simultaneously. Products were shipped that engineers were ashamed of. User trust was broken by surveillance features, forced AI integration, and commercial monetization embedded in a platform users paid for. Engineers who cared most about product quality and ethical integrity departed. The talent that built the empire is building its replacements at Canonical and Valve and System 76. The users following the engineers out the door are downloading Ubuntu and Zorin and Linux Mint on hardware Microsoft told them to discard. The internal survey measures a workforce where 62% of employees do not believe the products they build genuinely help the people using them. The Net Promoter Score measures an organization where more people actively discourage others from joining than recommend it. The voluntary turnover rate measures an organization losing nearly 1 in 5 employees every year, concentrated in the senior talent that cannot be replaced with new graduates carrying none of the institutional knowledge that departed with the engineers who built the systems they are inheriting. This is not a slow drift in the wrong direction. It is a structural collapse playing out in real time, across metrics that Microsoft's public communications are not designed to surface and that quarterly earnings calls are structured to obscure. The engineers who built Windows are building Linux. The users who trusted Windows are installing Linux. The company is selecting for compliance and losing the people who built the integrity it spent decades earning. And the question that went unanswered at the Q3 2025 All Hands, the one about how Microsoft reconciles its stated values with what it is shipping, is still unanswered. Every week that passes without an answer, more of the people who cared enough to ask it find their own answer somewhere else.